After the Catalan referendum, Spain divided? Let's get some answers from our panelists. Joining us in Madrid is Goodman, who is a freelance journalist in Spain. In London, we invited Nicholas Whyte, Senior Director of Global Solutions in APCO Brussels office. He has more than 2 decades experience in international affairs. And gentlemen, I want to welcome the both of you. What exactly, gentlemen, is this issue that we are talking about here? Is it about sovereignty or is it about self-determination? Let's go to Mr. Whyte first.
Of course, these two things are very, very closely aligned in the case of Catalonia, where we have a group of people who believe that they are a sovereign nation, they believe that they should be treated in that way, and that they should have the choice as to whether they exercise that sovereignty if as part of Spain, as they have been until now, or as an independent state. And then the dispute is whether that is a group of people that has that right to make that choice or not.
At this point, Mr. Goodman, since you are based in Spain, we understand those voters in Catalonia go to the polls. Actually, only 40% of them, about the whole population. Many of them shied away from casting their vote, whether agree or not with this referendum. So is it going to be representative enough?
Well, that is one of the questions, but in a big picture, you really have both sides in this debate. The Catalan leaders based in Barcelona and the Spanish government leaders based in Madrid, they're both saying that they represent democracy. In Madrid, they say that they are representing the Spanish Constitution and the rule of law, and they say that's what the basis of democracy in Spain is, and that's why Spain is a part of the European Union. But in Catalonia, they say they represent the people's right to vote and their right to self-determination. So you have a major train crashing into each other right now with this issue. And as to why that number of people came out on Sunday, October 1st to vote, not all of the Catalans, well, because the Constitutional Court of Spain said that vote was illegal, because according to the Spanish Constitution, only all of Spain can decide if one part is going to break away, and not just one part gets to decide that. So the Spanish government did everything it could to try to prevent that vote, but the Catalan leaders were able to carry off a portion of that vote.
At the same time, we see very strong attitude coming from the Spanish government, the central government. I mean, for example, the king, for the very first time, coming out in public and talking about this is legality of this so-called referendum, and he said it's totally illegal, and he's writing this letter. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of Spain saying we're going to do everything we can to prevent that from happening. I mean, the separation of Catalonia from Spain as a country. The question is, which one is going to represent so-called the people in Catalonia?
First of all, it's important to say that the 42% turnout in favour of independence, that as 42% of the electorate, that would be a pretty good result for any political party in a European democracy. I know different places have got different standards for this kind of thing, but it's actually, to get that percentage is quite a good result. And that then does raise the question of, does the Constitution constrain the wishes of the people, or should the Constitution adapt itself to what people actually want? And in a lot of countries, there's some difficulty in understanding quite why the Spanish position is as rigid as it is. Of course, this is driven partly by Spain's its own individual history. But in many countries, for instance, I'm sitting here in London, where the Scots had a referendum on independence not that long ago. I live in Belgium, where we have an ongoing debate about the relationships between the different parts of the country, which is carried out in a peaceful and productive and political way. So that's part of the issue in terms of international reaction. But in terms of Prime Minister Rajoy, we must remember that he has built his political career on trying to put the Catalans back into their box. He became Prime Minister essentially because he had led a revolt in the rest of Spain against the attempts by the Catalans to gain more autonomy 10 years ago. And so, when you talk about him doing anything he could to prevent independence, actually the one thing he didn't try was being nice to the Catalans, and that's something that may well have made a difference.
However, when you think about the other cases in Europe, let's just say Crimea, which is also an issue of whether separation, self-determination so-called, or sovereignty, at least for Russia. So Are we having different kinds of standards here?
I personally advised the governments of Montenegro and Kosovo and South Sudan on their campaigns for independence before they became independent states. And the conclusion I've drawn from those experiences and from observing Catalonia is that indeed there are very few common standards, that a different methodology is applied in every case. So when we're looking at double standards, I think we're looking at multiple standards. In the case of Crimea, let me just make one point, and then Mr. Goodman I think will have things to say as well. But on Crimea, they did not actually have a referendum on joining Russia. They had a referendum on separation from Ukraine and becoming an independent country. So the thing they voted for was the thing they did not actually get.
All right. And Mr. Goodman, what about your view? Are we having same standard, double standard, or actually, as Mr. Whyte mentioned, actually we have multiple standards. It really depends on what case we're talking about. And therefore, are we being fair?
Nicholas is talking about the pressures on Brussels and the European Union and these other independence movements outside of different countries. But right here in Spain, certainly one reason that Madrid is not interested in Catalonia going independent is because they suspect that if Catalonia were to go independent, then the rest of other regions of Spain, most notably the Basque region, called the Basque Country, the 3 provinces in northern Spain, which had an armed separatist, many people called it a terrorist group called ETA, during decades, which killed about 800 people in bombings and shootings, wounded more than 3,000. A horrible situation, not just in northern Spain, but in attacks all across Spain, including one of the biggest ones in Barcelona back in the year 1987. So finally, the Spanish government, with the help of many Basque leaders, have been able to stop ETA. ETA has laid down its arms. That terrible tragedy is basically finished, and so as Madrid now looks to Barcelona, which is clamoring for independence with the Catalans, they're thinking, we settled down the Basque issue up here in the north of Spain, we can't go that way. And it's not just those 2 regions. Overall, there are 17 regions that came up after Spain's constitution of 1978.
Well, you know, Mr. Goodman, as you said, Spain has a complicated history, and so do many countries. So here it is why that an issue about sovereignty or so-called self-determination could always be so controversial. So let's take a look at some of the attitudes of the EU countries. From Brussels, Mr. Whyte, you have probably noticed the countries there said very clearly, if Catalonia tried to separate itself from Spain, so-called independent, EU is not going to give it automatic membership, which means they're not likely to enjoy any of the benefits that they are having right now. And by the way, Mr. Whyte, as we know, the economy there is extremely important. That's why they want to separate it from the rest of Spain, because they think they're having a lot of financial burdens for the rest of Spain. They're getting better off, but others not. Okay, if they're not part of the EU, are they still really going to enjoy what they have argued, Mr. Whyte?
Yeah. And of course, we must realize that people in Brussels are pretty pragmatic. At the moment, Spain is sitting in all of the meetings of all of the member states, and the Spanish have made it very clear that if any other country shows the Catalans even the slightest bit of sympathy, then that country can forget about Spanish support for any of their proposals at European level for a very long time, and they will indeed face a Spanish veto. That's a very serious threat that Spain can capably make, and for that reason you're not going to see a move in advance to support the Catalan case from any of the European countries that are in the EU. However, you know, if push came to shove, if there were at some point, it's not going to happen immediately, but if there were an ordered separation between Catalonia and Spain, then everybody will be pragmatic and will find a way of making the new situation work. It's interesting that Spain has already said that in the event of Scottish independence, that Spain would not stand in the way of Scotland rejoining the European Union after the UK as a whole has left. So I think we have to be clear that there's an element of pragmatism both right now in terms of dealing with Spain as a European partner, and there will be in the future to deal with whatever situation may develop out of the current crisis.
Mr. Goodman, is that also what you assume?
Well, there is a lot of pragmatism, and as you both know, the landscape in Spain and across Europe has changed so dramatically in terms of politics, because really this latest independence movement by Catalonia, and there have been several over the years. This one can be dated back, many people date it back about 14 years, but clearly when Spain's economic recession hit around 2008, 2009, and the unemployment went way up to basically a fourth of the Spaniards were out of work, that's when you really saw a rise in independence sentiments. Before that, independence sentiments, according to the polls, had been around 11%. When unemployment was still pretty low. When it got up to about 24, 25%, independence sentiments moved up to about 45%. And then on top of that, speaking of the new pragmatism, what had been in Spain for decades, basically a two-party system, the conservatives and the socialists,
that's right,
and with some dominant parties in the regions like the Convergence and Unity Party in Catalonia, that all changed a few years ago with the emergence of some new parties. Another party on the left called Podemos, or We Can, and another party on the right called Citizens. And that has made for a coalition-type situation in the Spanish Parliament in Madrid, with a lot of pressure on the conservative prime minister, who's in a minority. He's got a minority government right now, and as well for the Catalan leader. He doesn't have a full majority over there. He's got to work with all these other people, and some of his partners want to have independence right now. So it's a much more difficult landscape than just a few years ago.
It's not a black and white situation. It's not a black and white situation in Spain. It's not a black and white situation in some of the other major European countries either. For example, Germany. For example, the UK. We all understand what's going on there, right, Mr. Whyte? And for example, France. You all got the far left, the far right, with very extreme ideas about what should happen to the country. We see them coming into the parliament, national level, local level. A lot of things are happening. Is this going to be the very first of this so-called domino effect that we're seeing with the case study of Catalonia in Spain? Mr. Whyte.
Well, of course, we don't know what's going to emerge out of the current crisis, but we've already seen existing party systems being shattered by the forces of the global effects of politics and economics that we've just been discussing. And if you're looking for an interesting domino that has started the toppling, I think we should look a little to the north of Spain and look at the election of President Macron in France. This was a man who did not have a political party, had no base of support a year before the election, and it came not quite out of nowhere because he was a known quantity, but created a new political force and has taken power. Of course, it's not proving easy for him because it's not an easy situation. At the same time, you know, the old systems do have resilience. We still have a conservative government in the UK. Chancellor Merkel managed to get re-elected in Germany with lesser support. We're seeing the insurgency from the extremists not quite reaching the success that they were expecting in different countries. I would include also the recent elections in the Netherlands and Austria in that regard. So we're seeing a weakening of traditional politics, but it's not obvious to me that what comes next is necessarily worse. We're seeing an openings being created for new forces, and that can be both good and it can be bad.
The economy in these places, for example, Catalonia, as we mentioned earlier, it is a much well-off part of Spain compared to the rest of the Spain. And one of the so-called political slogans coming from the Catalonian separatists was actually talking about Madrid is ripping us off, meaning letting the money flow out of Catalonia to the other parts of Spain. So, Mr. Goodman, how strong is this economic sense in the so-called political decision?
The economic argument way has been one of the key arguments through the years going back a decade or more. And there were various attempts, unsuccessful, for Catalonia to be able to keep more of their tax money because they're a net contributor to the rest of Spain. They were looking to the Basque region, which collects its own taxes. Catalonia wanted that power. Madrid wouldn't give them that power. So the economy has been a huge argument. And I have friends in Catalonia, this is something they talk about. But more recently, and especially after Sunday, October 1st voting, with the Spanish National Police and the Spanish Civil Guards keeping people away from the polling places, taking the ballot boxes out, more than 800 people injured, most of them not too seriously, but just this whole idea that a police force from elsewhere in Spain would be there trying to prevent a vote, that has become much more of an emotional argument now. And I would say that right now, that pride is the key, more important than the economic arguments. And it doesn't just end with the economy. There's debt issues.
talk about the debt, yes, we are seeing Catalonia as a region doing very well economically, Mr. Whyte, but it has enormous amount of debt, and the debt is actually in the hands of the Spanish government. So how should we see the so-called well-off economic situation of Catalonia?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we're looking at a slightly theoretical situation here, and Catalan independence doesn't look like it's,
No.
you know, whatever people are arguing about, it's not something that's going to happen in the coming week, is it? And the fact is, the historical precedents for how debt is handled in a situation like this, they are pretty clear. We talked about multiple standards earlier, but this is a case where there is really a single standard, which is that you come to a political agreement between the two regions concerned. And the Catalan argument, as I understand it, is that in fact so much of their debt is tied up with the relationship with Spain and with their lack of control over their own revenue that they reckon they could come to a reasonably equitable settlement. It is worth saying that, you know, the tax raising issue that Al Goodman just referred to, that is really important, and it's one of the areas where I think if there had been more flexibility shown on that from Madrid at an early stage, then I think we would not have reached the situation that we're currently in.
But we still have to ask this question. You know, for those with the rest of us in the rest of the world, how are we going to deal with issues like this? Let's go to Mr. Goodman first.
You know, I think the short answer there, Wei, would be Spain would see itself much worse off, and the people in Catalonia who are in favor of independence, which is certainly not all of them, not 90% according to all the polls.
Not at all.
They would say that they would be better off. But one of the key things here, as it's mainly been the Catalan leaders who've been appealing to the world, and you listen to their speeches, any number of the very top leaders and the middle leaders, they're all saying, look how the world is looking at us now. These images are going out to the world is paying attention. They want the implication, they want the participation from the European Union and beyond. President Trump has talked about this when the Prime Minister of Spain, Mr. Rajoy, was at the White House just a short while ago. So you're getting the American administration is saying they want a strong and united Spain. That's not really a change in policy, but you're seeing the Catalans appealing to the outside world. And I would just make this point, I'm sure Mr. Whyte might agree with this. You have human leaders involved, and because it's come to such a point right now, any miscalculation on the part of Barcelona or Madrid could have very, very serious consequences for a long time to come, and that's really one of the unknowns, is what's going to happen. How are they going to try to get past this next stage?
Mr. Whyte, final words from you too.
I think if we're looking for global standards, we should insist as far as we can that processes should be peaceful and non-violent, and that people should engage in dialogue with the other side, even if that sometimes seems to be difficult. As Nelson Mandela put it, it's very easy to talk to your friends. The difficult thing is to talk to the people you don't agree with. And I think we should bear that in mind and not prejudge local situations which we ourselves may not know all that much about.
Exactly. It is exactly the purpose of our show today, to have a fair discussion about what's going on, while at the same time we should really leave the decisions to the people there to decide on their own fate in Spain and in Catalonia, of course. And thank you for both of you, Al Goodman and Nicholas Whyte. Really appreciate you, gentlemen, for being with us.